Hello and welcome, fellow motorsports fans. It's not quite been the usual action-packed race week, but we still had a lot of good action over in Japan, Formula 3 testing and another Karting World Championship, and of course a long list of driver announcements for next year. So let's get straight to it with SuperFormula. We begin over at Fuji with SuperFormula, where we had the first of our two season closing double headers. So this really was a key round for the championship, and indeed we did have a key swing in the championship with a rather historic double win from Sho Tsuboi, charging up the pack in the first race, and also had a very well managed second race despite what initially looked like a bit of an unfortunate safety car timing. Either way, he now finds himself 14.5, don't ask, 14.5 points in the lead going into the last doubleheader, so definitely looks like the man to beat, and also crucially had the perfect year this time on Fuji, winning 3 out of 3 races. Tadasuke Makino also put in a pair of rock solid drives to now just about actually surpass Tomoko Nojiri for P2 in the championship. Now, to be honest, this is really more a story of Mugen and Nojiri dropping the ball, in my opinion, even though obviously it is a great result and it has been a great season for Makino all year long. In particular, in the first race for Nojiri, I think he got way too caught up in the duel with Tsuboi, and like not him himself, but like the team got too caught up battling Tsuboi while losing out strategically massively by pitting way too late essentially. And Tsuboi could make up for it, he could make that strategy work, but Nojiri couldn't, and it more or less just ruined his race. And then in the second one, he was just struggling for pace. It is still unknown whether he had an issue or not, but he was just slowly going backwards through the field, and I think it says a lot that Ayumu Iwasa did finish ahead of Nojiri in the second race, despite being rather anonymous himself, having a deleted lap in quali and like struggling to make progress, but still beat him, I believe, P7 to P8 or something like this. So not exactly an impressive drive. For Iwasa's case, we do have to point out that he did get a very strong P2 in the first race. That's a good result and I like it. But again, as I said, there have been these strategic issues for Nojiri, which I think he should have definitely been ahead of Iwasa in terms of like pace and where they started and how the race went early on. Just for Iwasa, I think he is making a great case for himself in this championship. It is very clear that he will do a good job here if he stays there. And I mean, I'd expect him to be in the title fight going forward if he ends up having a SuperFormula career. The issue is just, I still believe it just hasn't been impressive enough to warrant any hope of an F1 drive, in particular when looking at the Red Bull Junior team right now and how stacked they are with talent. I do want to highlight a very different team there now is KCMG, just for putting on a really sick show throughout the weekend. Both Niri Fukuzumi and Kamui Kobayashi with some rather like explosive, flashy driving, moving up the pack. Both got a podium, one in the first, the other in the second race. And yeah, hard-fought podiums at up. So truly not just good results for the team that lost a win in heartbreaking fashion during the first Fuji race this season, but also really just putting on a show for the fans to watch, so very good stuff there. The win still eludes them though, but honestly, if we continue this trend, I'm sure it is only a matter of time. We also had some Japanese junior racing with the last round of the Formula Regional Japanese Championship, and here the championship was decided in absolutely dominant fashion by Michael Sauter, bringing home the trophy. Although it has to be said, he has been comfortably outclassed in the last 2 rounds of the season by Japanese F4 graduates, making this whole title feel rather meaningless. I mean, yes, the field was weak to begin with, but if someone can graduate from a lower formula mid-season and just start dominating races over the championship favorite, then it's really not a great look and something we do need to keep in mind when thinking about Michael Sauter's next step. The bright spot of the weekend really was these Japanese F4 graduates stepping up, and namely the 2 Toyota boys, Yuki Sano and Kazushia Urabi. I can't pronounce his name, but either way, both of them are pretty quick. They shared P1 and P2 in both races. and especially Yuki Sano is really growing on me over these last couple months with his Japanese F4 shenanigans, obviously with some misfortune there, but also a couple wins. And then he recently had a cool little cameo over in the Toyota Cup at Road America in a wet weather, just shit fest really. It was a chaotic race, but he did an excellent job there and really put on a cool show. So it is a guy I would suggest to keep an eye on. That was it for the racing action, but there has been F3 testing, so let's talk about that. We're at the post-season Formula 3 test over at Jerez, and it has to be said, it has probably been the most meaningless test in the history of post-season tests, as it was the last appearance of the car with the new chassis getting introduced for next season. It was coincidentally also the last outing for Genter, as it has been announced that Dams is actually taking over their slot for next season, which I think is pretty cool. I guess there is at least the potential it could be a better package than the Genter has been over the last couple of years, but really no huge news or anything. For anyone doubting how irrelevant these times are, just look at the fact that Jesse Carrasquedo has been topping some of these sessions, or not topping, but been very high up in some of these sessions. So really all of these results have to be taken not with a grain, but rather like a barrel or a rock of salt, or however you want to phrase this. So instead of discussing these meaningless testing times, I would much rather discuss the grid that this testing has produced and what this grid could look like next season if it was actually going to be these exact drivers. And I want to highlight some of the worst ones where I hope they do not appear in F3 next season. And I would very much hope you agree or disagree down in the comments. So let's go. I've mentioned the first name, Jesse Carrasquedo, serial backmarker, first in F4 and now also, yeah, he has had a bit of a glow up in Euro Cup 3, but still a lot more budget than skill. And if he is serious about his racing, I hope he stays in Euro Cup and only did this as a one-off test, but I am afraid he might actually end up in F3. Then, and this one is probably controversial, Freddie Slater, but only with the context of I would hate to see him stuck in a Rodin next year. It would be a huge waste of his ability, but then again it looks highly unlikely, and by all rumors he is going to do a dual FRJC and GB3 program with Prema and I guess Rodin, so I think we should be safe on this front, but I just want to put it out there, please Freddie, don't go to Rodin F3 if you can help it. Then, one of the more egregious cases, the one we've been annoyed with in F2, Niels Koolen. Maybe you think, oh yeah, F3, that sounds a lot more reasonable than F2. Maybe he isn't all that terrible if you haven't seen him outside of his F2 stint, but I can assure you, he is that terrible. He's been a serial backmarker in FRJC, he's been a backmarker in Indy Next, and he's really just been a backmarker everywhere he's been so far in his career. I really don't think he should be near open wheel cars. He's not displayed any ability of, driving them well so far. And again, if he is serious about actually having a decent career and not just paying to have some fun drive time, then he should probably go over to the sports car world, because he's actually not been all that awful over in LMP2s. These are really the super frauds and Freddie Slater, of course, but there's another couple names that probably shouldn't be in F3 either, and that's mainly Gerard G. We've talked about him last year. Then Nicola Lacorte, I think, could do very well with another year in FRJC. Jorge Garfias, God, that name as well is a handful, but I think he's just a little forgettable. Not terrible, he could be there, but doesn't need to be in F3, let's put it this way. And then you can make good cases for both Joshua Dufek and Matthias Zagazeta. Arguably should not be returning either, as both have had pretty poor seasons last time. Yes, at least Dufek I would personally like to see returning. I think he's a lot better than he was able to show, but if we go off their last season results, then you can certainly make this case. Now, of course, trying to argue how a grid should look on merit in junior categories is a bit of a weird thought exercise, because we all know that's just not how it works, but I do find it a fun thing anyway. So now that I've told you who shouldn't be on the final grid, let's instead bring up the names that should be. Now, of course, we've got Callum Voisin, who most likely is taking Slater's Rodin seat, so I think we'll be good there. Then we've got Sami Meguetounif, where I can really only assume he also didn't want to pay for testing, because I think it would be a crime if he doesn't return, and he has showed a lot of good stuff over the last year. His main flaws are like psychological and racecraft and not raw pace, so he is also one of these drivers where I think there's still a lot of potential to be unlocked. Then of course we have our gang of GP3 rejects, most importantly Kucharczyk, who should definitely be in this series next year, but also Mackenzie Cresswell and James Hadley, you can at least argue deserve a shot, and definitely deserve a shot more than some of these drivers I've listed earlier. Admittedly, most of the top FRJC runners have at least found a go home or can afford to do another FRJC year like Gilter or something, so you know, at least we are good on that front. Let me know your ideal F3 grid changes from this testing lineup to the actual official announcements down in the comments, but we will now talk about some karting. Over in Portimao, where the second half of the FIA Karting World Championship, obviously we had the single speed classes racing at PFI a couple of weeks ago, and now we had the shifter classes with a newly crowned, I guess we can't call him a world champion, but like a World Cup winner, Cristian Bertuca, with a flawless weekend if ever I've seen one. He won every single heat after putting it on pole, and I mean, yeah, this is about as dominant as you can win any karting event. He is, for my money, the biggest talent currently stuck in karting. By this I mean he is 17 years old, so most likely this isn't a choice of waiting to graduate to F4s or anything. It looks like he just doesn't have the budget or the ambition to do so. If I had to guess, I would guess budget. So really, I do hope we can see him step up to a car at some point. Yes, he lost out in a head-to-head to Freddie Slater last year for the European title, but truth be told, losing out to Freddie Slater, as we now know, not a bad thing really, more or less an expected thing. We do have to say, it was a Birrell art weekend all weekend long though. This is the only caveat here, because we also had Brazilian Matheus Morgato, sort of the American ace driver for this squad, in P2, and then also Artem Sevryukhin making it to P4. Fortunately missing out on the podium, obviously a couple of reasons not to like the guy, but make no mistake, he was just as rapid as he was in the pre-race a couple weeks ago, and is certainly one of these guys where, I mean, again, sure, I dislike him personally, but in terms of speed, I would really like to see him in a car as well. Much like the other Russian rejects, if we can call him this, mainly Maximorov and Anthony Kavalkin, both with rock solid runs throughout the weekend, both in the top 10 at the end, but Parolin maybe just not quite up to the task as a team. Instead, Dion van Werven got the sort of best of the rest slot in P5 as the best Saudi kart driver overall. He is a 16-year-old Dutchman. We've talked about him as one of the stars in the second tier of German shifter karting, the DSKC, and graduating to the DKM, the top German shifter karting tier. And I do hope again he finds some sort of money, if he doesn't already, to step up to cars, because if you can get into these shifter karts and do really well within a year or two, just in terms of like the characteristics and everything, it appears to translate really well to a Formula racing career. So I would assume he'd be quite good if he was to step up to an F4. Similar story for the youngest man on the grid, 15-year-old British racer Timo Youngling. They even spell his name in a German way with the U, you know, the U with the two dots over it now. So I really don't know what's going on there. He's raced under a British license all his career. I think he is very British. Yeah, I'm going to keep it British for now, but this is the sort of thing my brain can't quite cope with. As I said, youngest guy on the grid, he's had a really good run throughout the weekend, even if he didn't quite get rewarded because of an accident late in the race, but otherwise he would have been on for a very solid sort of like top 15-ish result. Last but not least, female watch, and you can't believe how glad I am that we can say this in a karting event, we can have a female watch segment. Unfortunately, two of the three didn't do all that well. The first one, you know, Mathilde Patz, obviously she did French F4 this year, and her weekend here has gone about as well as her French F4 weekend, so not at all, because she was out before even the superheats on Sunday. And a similar story for Ein Dames Jr., Zoe Floresco Portolea. again, her name is quite difficult, but she hasn't really shown anything throughout the year, sadly. Apparently she's done reasonably well on a national level in Italy, and that's cool, but on the European stage, her first shifter year has been quite forgettable. It hasn't been forgettable though for young Emma Felbermayr, and we have talked about her as well already. Yes, her weekend didn't end with the result she would have hoped for. She unfortunately didn't even make it to the final, but oh, her weekend started so good. She put it P7 overall in qualifying out of 100 and something drivers. So if that isn't impressive, then I don't know what's impressive to you. Caveat, apparently it was a pretty wet session, so of course the results are to be taken with a grain of salt as well, but I think that was an excellent drive, and she did build on this throughout the 5 heats as well by finishing P3 and P4 in, I believe, 4 out of 5. Now, unfortunately, the 5th one, she had some sort of incident, accident, whatever, that dropped her all the way to the back. And if you know how these heats work, just imagine a 5-race season. Of course, consistency will be rewarded massively. So the 1 DNF dropped her in the intermediate classification to like P46 going into the superheats. So it was always a bit of an uphill battle from that point onwards. Very unfortunate way it ended, but don't get fooled. She showed massive potential there, in my opinion. And from what we can gather from Instagram, she might actually be doing the step to F4 next year, and I am all about that. Then the top flight of karting, the KZ category. I'll be dead honest, I did fall asleep during this race, not because it was boring, but because I've been traveling and it's been a very long day, so there's not too much I can say about this. I just want to point out Pedro Hildebrand was threatening to make it the perfect BRL art weekend, but ultimately did lose out to the 2 Sodi cards of Senna van Wolstein and Giuseppe Palomba. And then interestingly, it wasn't the superstar that Senna van Wolstein really is who ended up finally winning a world title, but it was in fact Giuseppe Palomba passing him in the end and taking the win for himself. So a cool story here. I spent all of January getting absolutely battered by Palomba in iRacing in an F3 car, so I'm really happy that I am not the only one, I guess. Anyway, let's talk about the news. Talking about driver news, of course, the best time of the year, seeing where everyone will end up going into next season. And we have the first F1 Academy program announced, with Ella Lloyd confirmed as the Rodin F1 Academy driver and also as the McLaren supported F1 Academy entry. So effectively now a McLaren Junior, I guess more or less taking over Abby Pulling's seat. And she is really the first of hopefully a new wave of female drivers where she so far has shown all the ingredients to, maybe live up to at least the potential of pulling par in Burg and not be like an anonymous midfielder that would just get absolutely battered in male fields. She actually does really well in British F4 in not the greatest machinery of all time. Then we have a couple Indy Next news. Now, 2 announcements for the Andretti squad over there. Lockie Hughes, the USF Pro 2000s champion, announced. No big surprises there and absolutely deserved. I'm sure he'll do well. He is a little more on the older side and more experienced side anyway. And we've got Salvador the Alba staying for a 2nd season with Andretti. Also well deserved. One of the top rookies. We have talked a lot over the year of like how inconsistent really everyone outside of the top 3 in this Indy Next season was, and he was no exception. But the upsides he's shown were definitely there. He's shown a lot of potential, and I'm glad he returns. Unfortunately, Tommy Smith has also been announced going to Indy Next for the HMD program. And not to make fun of him or anything, but I think he will just be a little outclassed in this grid, at least in the top half. Now, the Indy Next grid isn't particularly deep. The bottom half does have a lot of weird names floating about, and I'm sure he'll be able to get some top 15, maybe a couple top 10s, but I don't see him getting anywhere near podium. And I really think this is a bit of a waste of money. But I mean, if he's got the money and he wants to do it, then good for him, I guess. We also had our Indy Next champion, Louis Foster, finally announced, going to RLL over in the IndyCar series. Obviously, he absolutely needed to step up after getting one of the most dominant Indy Next wins ever. And I am glad it is with a pretty good team and not like a backmarker either. RLL has proven to provide good machinery for the drivers that can deal with him to at least Obviously, he won't be a championship contender no matter how good of a driver he is, just to put it into perspective. But I do think RLL is like the perfect squad to allow a driver to show your potential and, you know, make yourself attractive for the actual top seats going forward. Back to Europe, we have the first F2 announcement of this sort of announcement block, with Jack Crawford remaining at Dams for another year. Obviously a bit of an odd choice to stay for a third season, because we know F1 teams just don't really care once you're in your third season, and it's not like I see him as a championship contender in Dams either. But it has to be said, I said going into this year, he needs to dominate Korea, and he did. So he did everything he can do, really, in my opinion. And I do think, even if maybe it won't be the best for his career in terms of F1, obviously he is there to put himself into the shop window for other series. And personally, I just appreciate that we have another like proven benchmark to compare people against next season. Then we had two confirmations for F3. James Wharton announced for Art and Noël Léon announced to Prema. Neither of these a surprise after the testing lineup, of course, and, you know, together with all of the rumors floating around. I can just say both of these are great choices. In particular, Art has managed to like sneakily assemble what potentially is the strongest looking roster on paper. Someone pointed out in the comments and last week, and I do absolutely agree, between experienced Van Hopen, the ace driver that Tuukka Taponen will turn out to be, I'm sure, and James Wharton, who's doing really well in Freca right now. They look properly dangerous, and I hope the car can live up to these expectations. In Leon's case, Prema obviously didn't want a full rookie squad, understandably so, and I think he is like a really cool choice to make, in the sense that he has probably outdriven his machinery the most last season. Caveat, hard to tell, because both of his teammates are rather unimpressive with Tommy Smith and Sophia Flörsch, but he didn't just beat his teammates, obviously, he actually dragged this car into podium contention multiple times, so I do think he has done about everything you can do to warrant a step up into a more competitive seat, and I'm glad he'll get this opportunity. All things considered, his 2022 was really the outlier in his career, and I do think some people still have like a bad opinion of him because of that, and because he's only been in Euroformula last year. But make no mistakes, Noël Léon is a really quality driver in my opinion. And then last but not least, the least surprising announcement of the day, Deegan Fairclough graduating within Hightech from the F4 roster to the GB3 roster. Yeah, this is about the most expected step ever. I hope he can at the very least do what William McIntyre did this year and, you know, sort of throw himself into championship contention. Truth be told, he is more experienced, a little more on the older side. I think he'll have some pressure to like actually be in the championship fight properly and like have a Kucharczyk type run. Obviously, depending on who he'll go up against. But for example, Nikita Johnson, yeah, Nikita Johnson has driven the car a little more, but I think overall in terms of experience, Fairclough should be the one winning this. Not saying I predict him to, but like this is the expectation he will be under. So, you know, it won't get any easier from here, Deegan, that's all I'm saying. Now then, as always, it's been a lot. Now is your time to let me know all of your thoughts about this down in the comments. Just one quick service announcement. I will finally be watching some real-life racing on this weekend for the first time of the year by going to the Hockenheimring for the DTM final. So I don't know, next week's episode might be delayed, might have a different topic. Maybe I'll talk about DTM for a one-off change. Who knows? Just stay tuned and you will find out. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I hope to catch you in whatever the next episode may be.